right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the very first episode of MORE-VILLE, Orville. This is a podcast dedicated to everyone's favorite sci-fi comedy series, The Orville. I am your co-host, Mike L. I am joined by G.I.Jolie.
Hi!
G.I.Jolie from the Comic Book Syndicate and co-host of Full Volume, right?
Yeah, that's where I'm from. Oh, I also make guest appearances on Here Comes the Spider-Cast.
That's right, every week. And
pretty much every week, yeah.
Yes, for like 2 years now. And also, for the first time appearing anywhere in a podcast, co-owner of Meteor, Champ-Ian.
Hi, Mike. Hi, Jolie. It's great to be here and joining you on this podcast.
Yay!
Woo! Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
We basically conceived of it. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jolie.
It's like we took our movie nights to the next level.
Yes.
Right. And basically, I've had people bugging me to do podcasts for the last 10 years. This is the first one that I've taken a good look at and said, yes, this is the podcast
honored.
for me.
And I believe we only came up with this idea like, a week ago? Or maybe a week and a half ago?
Yeah, it's very, very quick.
Yes. Basically, what happened was I was sitting at work and I'm like, I wonder when Orville Season 3 is coming out. And when I found out it was, March 10th, I'm like, oh, crap. I better get on that because I knew I wanted to review the first 26 episodes before we jump to Season 3. So that's why we're jumping into it right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as everyone knows, The Orville is clearly a homage / satire / pastiche of Star Trek, specifically Star Trek The Next Generation, which has been one reason some critics have dismissed it, but I'm not one of those people. I love it. We're going to talk about our love of The Orville in a minute, but before we jump into that, let's talk about Star Trek. We're all big fans of Star Trek. I'll just say briefly that I first got into Star Trek when I was, I believe, in grade 8. The summer between grade 8 and 9. I was, 12 years old, and I discovered Star Trek one night on late night television at midnight or something, and that summer, I think I invented marathoning because this is like 1989, 90. I watched like 4 to 5 episodes of Star Trek a day. I love Star Trek. Ian Phillips, you're roughly the same age as me. Why don't you tell us how you got into Star Trek?
I believe my first experience, my first exposure to Star Trek would have been a little bit earlier than that. I'm going to say probably 1985 or thereabouts is when I was exposed to it. And that was by way of Star Trek II, Wrath of Khan, airing on our one of our local television stations here. And my dad recorded it on a VHS tape on our top-load VHS recorder, and I watched that tape probably 500 times. I wasn't even out of grade school, and I could quote that movie front to back. I thought it was the greatest thing. And then when Star Trek: The Next Generation was announced, I believe the trailer was part of the opening of Star Trek 4. That's when that was released to the public, and my jaw hit the floor. I thought it was the greatest thing ever.
Right. And you were right.
it's been in the back of my head ever since. It's been I think the entire Star Trek franchise is amazing. It's incredible movies, incredible television, for the most part.
Yes, we'll get to that in a minute. But I'm with you. I mean, I saw Next Generation here and there, but it wasn't until that one summer I got into the old series. And then I marathoned the movies, and then I dived into Next Generation, and I was obsessed with it for years after that, up until this day. But G.I. Jolie, I know you got into Star Trek later than we did. Do you want to tell us how you first became exposed to it?
I first became exposed to it, and I'll always credit him for it. My friend I was one of those kids that switched schools in the 4th grade. And there was a kid that dressed like Indiana Jones. His name was Rodney Smale. And he loved everything. He loved Jurassic Park. He loved, obviously, Indiana Jones. And he loved Star Wars, but he really loved Star Trek. And he was always drawing very, very technically, really, really technically well drawn lead pencil drawings of the Enterprise. And I always asked him what that was. And he told me what it was. And in an attempt to kind of get it looked interesting to me. So in an attempt to figure out what Star Trek was, I rushed home and tried to watch on the 5 channels that we had access to. I tried to watch Star Trek, but I couldn't find it. But I did find, however, at about 4 p.m., they aired episodes, like reruns of Voyager. So Janeway was my sort of, what do they call that? Gateway captain?
Gateway, yeah.
And then he once VHS, like VHS collections of television shows came out, he started to let me borrow them, and then I would watch them, and that's kind of how I got into it. And then I noticed that they had Star Trek movies at Real Time, one of those places where you rented videos. But I lived out in the country, so we didn't have a Blockbuster or a Jumbo Video. We had something called Real Time, Real spelled REEL.
Clever.
Sure.
So clever. And I was like, wait a second, this star captain is Captain Kirk, a man. Who is this? It's a journey home.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
My favorite Star Trek movie with the whale is always the one with the whale to this day.
Voyage Home, yep.
The Voyage Home. I always call it the Journey Home. I think I'm confusing it with like Free Willy 2's subtitle. But like, they both have whales. It was the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And that is that is how I was eased into outer space.
Right. Now, based on what we've just said, you'd think that we'd be doing a podcast about Star Trek Discovery or Picard, but we're not. We're doing it about the Orville. So we should very briefly let audiences know why we're not doing it about current Star Trek. I will start by saying that while I love Star Trek Next Generation with all my heart, I started to lose interest in the current Star Trek a little bit with Deep Space Nine, Voyager. I gave them both a chance for 1 or maybe 2 seasons, but they never grabbed me as much as Next Generation. And then Enterprise, again, didn't grab me. Now looking back, it's kind of one of those things where you look back and you go, oh my God, what was I thinking? Now I'm going back and watching DS9. It's better than I remember, and I'll eventually get to Voyager. However, with more recent Star Trek, I did watch the movies by J.J. Abrams, and I enjoyed them when I saw them, but with each viewing, they get worse and worse. I think they're entertaining, but they don't have nearly the substance, right, or the social commentary of the classic Star Trek, so I don't really like them. And then Discovery, I found really ponderous and pretentious and just boring. I like some of the characters, but the main lead characters I don't like at all. I don't like what they've done with the Klingons. I don't like anything. I liked parts of Picard. There were parts of Picard I really liked, but overall, there was a lot of things that I really hated. And so while I might give Picard Season 2 a chance, I've completely given up on Discovery. But Ian, let's start with you. When did you start to lose faith in Star Trek?
Well, the shine started to the bloom came off the rose, I think, when I watched Star Trek Nemesis. I think that was
yes.
the one where they cloned the Romulans cloned Captain Picard and were going to use him for something, and I have no idea what their motivation was for cloning him, but it was just a dark, messy, depressing ordeal. Like I had to sit through that movie waiting for it to end. And I think that's kind of the turning point in the Star Trek franchise, where they started going for dark, they started going for explosions, and it was just, they had lost all of the optimistic view of the future that I think was the hallmark of Star Trek. I mean, Gene Roddenberry's vision was a universe where all of humanity had banded together, and we were no longer really fighting amongst ourselves, but we're exploring our greater universe and working on problems that we found as a team. Now, Star Trek has never been shy to explore the interpersonal struggles of the crew, but it wasn't, I don't know, like watching Discovery is just this bleak dystopian nightmare.
Right.
It is so far removed from anything, any other Star Trek show that I've seen, and not in a way that I think is enjoyable.
Right,
Even
right.
when you look at the tone of Deep Space Nine, like all the set pieces are very much darker than in Star Trek: The Next Generation or the original series. Any other Star Trek series, really. Like it's very dark. It's bleak there as well, but it still has an optimistic message, right? Like they're building something from the remains of this gutted Cardassian space station, and they're trying to build something, right? It's not this ominous, like everything's going to blow up if no, it's Discovery, too depressing. And I watched the first season of it, and I couldn't keep going. It just didn't do anything for me. I left every episode feeling depressed and feeling like, what did I just watch?
Right. I'm with you. I mean, for example, I really like Mary Wiseman, who plays Sylvia Tilly. She's a great character. If we had 7 Mary Wisemans, maybe the show would be better. But yeah, I found the same thing. Just depressing, dystopian, and again, pretentious. I just don't know what they were thinking. So anyway, G.I. Jolie, what about yourself? I know that I think you still watch Discovery, but what is your feeling about current Star Trek right now, the last 5 to 10 years?
My feelings about Star Trek for the last 5 to 10 years. Okay. I'm somebody who always tries to stay optimistic about properties that they love. So when the Chris Pine generation came, I loved it, but I didn't love it because it was like Star Trek. I loved it because it was like, oh, that would be cool if Star Trek were action movies.
Mm-hmm.
I love that for this, a reimagining, fun. But I never thought about it in the way Ian described it. In light of the telling us again what Gene Roddenberry's vision of Star Trek actually is. However, I wasn't turned off by Deep Space Nine. I actually kind of liked Neelix and the bar and the holodeck. Since I came into it a little bit later.
Neelix is Voyager, right?
Oh, I'm confusing all of it.
Quark. Yes, I love Quark.
That's it.
I love Quark. Yeah,
I love Quark. Okay, sorry, alien heads. They all tend to look the same. No, I'm kidding. One's green and one is not at all the same. Anyway,
just been canceled by a million Trekkies. But anyway, go ahead.
Just me, not you. But that's okay because I'm the girl. So obviously, I have to prove my worth.
Yeah, name 3 Star Trek episodes. Anyway,
right? So I got from Star Trek. Ultimately, I got from Star Trek something different, and I always looked for that in all of the properties going forward. So I really gravitated toward Paris, and oh shoot, again canceling myself. Harry Kim, yeah. So I really liked them as a duo, and I really liked their little adventures in the holodeck. And then I really liked in the new movies, I really liked the way that Zachary Quinto and Chris Pine played off each other. There's nothing there when you watch Discovery, though.
Right.
It is. It's exactly as Ian described it. I mean, I hate to love to go back to everything that Ian just said, but it's dystopian, it's bleak. There's nothing there for anybody. Everyone's miserable. Why is everyone miserable? And
everyone's double crossing. Yeah, I know.
Yeah. However, I don't, because I'm a completist, and my friend she plays Lieutenant Amin. I had to keep watching it just to see her on Star Trek, because it's weird to see somebody as that's your dream. That's my dream. And whatever. It's really cool. So I had to keep watching. She doesn't come in until the 3rd season. And then it's still terrible. But the Klingon get better.
Okay.
But they don't get much better.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like,
Sure.
it's like take the good with the bad, but mostly it's bad. I too didn't really like Picard. I don't know what's happening to Star Trek now. There's like a glimmer of hope with Picard, but it's barely there.
Have you watched Strange New Worlds? Is that out yet?
I have not watched it yet. Is that the animated?
No, that's the new TV show where it's a Pike, Captain Pike, and it's the old crew, like pre-Kirk crew. Obviously not. Okay.
I don't think. And Rebecca Romaine is his number one.
Right.
Number two. No, I don't think that's out yet.
Okay, shows what I know. Let me just.
But I'll watch it. I'll watch it because I hear it's supposed to be.
Oh yeah, May 5th. Okay.
A little more fun.
Okay. I mean, hey, I might give that a chance. Again, I'm not like, whatever. I'm not hard, like drawing a hard line. It's just more like, I'm not interested. And then there's people like, well, if you don't love all Star Trek, you're not a Star Trek fan. Okay, I guess I'm not a Star Trek fan then. I don't care. I'm not going to watch something that I don't enjoy just to be loyal to a brand that's owned by, a multi-billion-dollar corporation that doesn't give a shit about what Gene Roddenberry's vision was, right? Like, I mean, I love 90s Star Trek, but after Gene Roddenberry died, it becomes something different, right? Just like when George Lucas sold Star Wars, I might like some new Star Wars, but at the end of the day, it's just a big corporate cookie cutter creation, right? It's the new Star Wars might have good moments, but it's never going to be George Lucas's vision. It can't be. He doesn't own it, right? Which is another podcast. We'll talk about that later. But so anyway, Star Trek Discovery came out. None of us really liked it. And just around the same time, another TV show came out called The Orville. And that's what this podcast is about. And for some reason, all of us loved it. Apparently, most audiences love it because it got like an 80% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Critics hated it. It got like a 30% rating by critics. I don't know what the hell show they saw, but I cannot understand how anyone could not love this show. I'll just
I can understand. I can understand how they could be confused by it.
Yeah.
Critics in particular, and not knowing what they're watching.
Well, let's just, I mean, everyone who's listening to this podcast knows what The Orville is, but we'll just say briefly, it was created by Seth MacFarlane, who has a dubious reputation as the creator of Family Guy and what's the other one? Modern Family? No.
American Dad.
American Dad.
Now, I mean, whatever you say about Family Guy, some of it's funny, some of it isn't, whatever. Some of it's juvenile, fine. Not only did he create the show, but he's in the show as the captain, okay? So, I've watched interviews with him. Seth MacFarlane has said of all the things that he ever dreamed about creating or doing when he came to Hollywood, this was his number one thing. And now, I don't know if he specifically meant, I'm going to do a satire of Star Trek that's not called Star Trek, or I'm going to recreate Next Generation with a different name. I don't know specifically what about it was his dream. But, I mean, hey, I've done my own, films and short films, and I would love to do a science fiction like Star Trek one day, so I can totally understand his passion. Now, getting back to Discovery, I can't imagine someone, growing up dreaming one day I'm going to do a bleak, depressing, dystopian science fiction that, depresses its viewers. I can't imagine someone dreaming about that. But this show, The Orville, specifically recreates the feeling of Star Trek: The Next Generation. Now, I love the original series, but Next Generation it had even more control by Gene Roddenberry. So I think Next Generation is even more of his vision, where he specifically did not want conflict between his crew members, right? Like Ian said, he wanted all of humanities to be solved in a sort of a diplomatic way by working together, right? So that was one of the hallmarks of that show. The Enterprise and the Next Generation did not look like a warship. It looked like someone's living room, right? Like the technology. I'm not sure, Jolie, if there's a specific name for that architectural style, but everything's very fluid. The curves are very fluid. There's a lot of wood. There's bright lights, right? Like it feels very welcoming. It's not like you're watching Ridley Scott's Alien or Blade Runner, where everything is a little bit oppressive or gritty or whatever you may say. But so it recaptures that. It also recaptures the characters. Now, obviously, Seth MacFarlane brings his sense of humor to the show, which some people think is juvenile. But to me, I watch it and I think, no, I think for one thing, these characters, these actors are having fun. You can see it, right? So I don't really know what else to say about the show, but to me, it's like we all love Star Trek. There's a lot of people that like Star Trek, and Seth MacFarlane has recreated that magic feeling that we got from Next Generation, and that's why I love it. We'll talk about it as we go, but it gets the social commentary, and it also gets the lightness, because there was lightness in the old one, but obviously it's funnier. But I think that's why I love it, is it recaptures that feeling of Next Generation. Ian, what do you think?
I agree with that. This feels to me like fan fiction, but I don't use that as a disparaging term. Like it reminds me, in a sense, of that sort of wide-eyed wonderment that I got watching Star Trek: The Next Generation for the first time, and that wonderment is the sort of thing that ended up with me, like at my grandparents' house on the weekend, just sitting at the kitchen table drawing my own Star Trek comics, right? Because I was just so enthralled in the universe. And I would put myself into that, and I would put my own humor into those comics. So, of course, Seth MacFarlane has the opportunity to create this show. He's going to put himself into it. He puts himself in the captain's chair, understandable, but then he gives it his own flavor. He gives it his own comedic style, which I understand and I appreciate. Now, that's not always the best thing. I think that sometimes the show struggles with what it wants to be. And I think that sometimes it goes too far in different directions. But that's just him putting himself into it. Now, it took me a while to get into the Orville right off the bat, just because I'm not the biggest Seth MacFarlane fan.
Sure.
And some of the reasons why I was hesitant to watch it, they do come through in the show.
Sure.
But for the most part, I think that I was a little worried about nothing there, right? Like the humor,
Sure.
It does work a lot of the time. Not all the time, but it works a lot of the time. And that does, like, there were those moments of levity in the original Star Trek as well. How many episodes of the original series ended with the main cast having a belly laugh around the captain's chair,
right,
as we faded off to the end credits.
Right.
There was always room for that in Star Trek. And I think that a lot of that comes through here as well.
All right. G.I.Jolie, what are your feelings in general about your impression of the Orville when it started?
Excuse me. I think I'm always in the same boat as Ian, it seems. I was an early adopter of Seth MacFarlane's humor, but I was also an early, I jumped ship on him real early because it started to get, there was a point in my life where I stopped finding Family Guy funny, and
Right.
I was very worried that the Orville would be, quote, Family Guy funny. And, but hey, I love Star Trek, and I read about how in love with Star Trek Seth MacFarlane also was. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to give this guy a chance, because I come from a world where properties are adapted from from their quote comic books into films by people who claim to be in love with the original content, and then it ends up being absolute garbage. But every interview I saw with him, every interview I read, he seemed to only want to gush about Star Trek. So I was like, okay, I'll give this a try. And I loved it. I was really, really afraid that the comedy would be, again, Family Guy-ish. But the comedy almost comes off as like an early progenitor, to James Gunn style comedy
Right.
now that you see, where it's like, You get the seriousness of the action, and then there's seriousness in dialogue, and then there's just like asides. There's the comedy happens in the sides between characters, and I was really glad to see that here. A lot of the interpersonal relationships in Star Trek, they weren't as comedic, and if there were laughs, they're playing something for laughs. Like if Data was doing something culturally weird, that it would be the crux of the laugh. It wouldn't just be like. It wouldn't just be like banter, and we're getting banter, and it was kind of character building in a way, and I found myself falling in love with the characters of the show. So initially, I fell absolutely like head over heels in love with the Orville. I was like, why is this? It felt like I hadn't seen Star Trek in a very long time, and then I was seeing it again, but it wasn't. So that was it for me.
Well, okay, so now with that, we're going to jump into we're going to talk about the first episode here, okay? So I'm trying to find a quick summary of the first episode. I guess I can start us off, and you guys can jump in if I miss anything, but basically we're quickly introduced to, in the Orville, Season 1, Episode 1, we have an episode directed by Jon Favreau, who everyone knows as the writer of course, Swingers, as well as writer-director of Maid and director of Iron Man 1 and 2, creator of The Mandalorian or co-creator, sorry. I believe he also co-created the Book of Boba Fett. He also directed a bunch of other stuff. So yeah, he's a Hollywood, mover and shaker. Heavy hitter, yes. So he directed this first episode. It's funny because rewatching it, I really enjoyed it, but then I enjoyed episode 2 more, and I enjoyed episode 3 even more. So even though 1 was really good, it does get better. So some people were turned off by episode 1. If you were turned off by it, I encourage you to keep going because it does get better. However, I do think episode 1 was great. So we start off, we're introduced to Captain, well, he's not a captain yet, but Ed Mercer, who's the star of the show, played by Seth MacFarlane. He catches his wife, Kelly Grayson, in bed with an alien in a funny scene that we won't spoil because it's a gag. We're not going to spoil it. But anyway, basically fast forward a year, and he becomes the captain of the USS Orville. He is sent on his first mission. Before he can get on the mission, he is assigned a new first officer, which happens to be his ex-wife, Kelly Grayson. And then they end up just, getting together. You meet most of the people on the crew, and they go on their first mission, which is a very Star Trek-esque plot where they meet some scientists that have discovered a way to, they get to the planet, they discover a machine that can accelerate time. Mm-hmm. They are shown how this can accelerate time by taking a banana and aging the banana like a month or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Then, after that happens, someone in the group of scientists is actually a Krill, which is like a Klingon, right?
Working with the Krill.
And he attempts to steal the device to use for his own purposes. Mm-hmm. And then, they're basically trapped on the planet, but on the Orville, Bortus and Kelly.
No, Kelly's down on the planet as well.
Yeah.
Bortus is in command, and Malloy, the helmsman, he's buying them time down on the planet by doing a maneuver called hugging the donkey, where he essentially zooms in and out in very close proximity to the Krill ship while firing on them. He's too close, so they can't get a lock on him.
Right. I forgot.
Meanwhile, down on the planet, they have the Krill ship. When they arrive, they send down a landing party, and they have to take this device and run back to the shuttle with it. Mm-hmm. And by the time they escape the planet with the device, the Orville is a little bit distracted by this donkey hugging maneuver. And the shuttle has had its guidance knocked out, and a very tricky maneuver is required to essentially manually get the shuttle into the Orville's hangar bay while trying to avoid being destroyed by the Krill at the same time.
Right.
But then once all is said and done, the Orville is essentially disabled, and they have to use some sort of chicanery to essentially destroy the Krill ship because they've got nothing but this device.
And so then Kelly comes up with the idea of agreeing to send the device over, which is what they want, but they also secretly hide a redwood, right? A redwood seed inside the device, so that when it materializes over there, it ages the redwood seed into a full redwood in the space of a few seconds, and it's big enough that it basically destroys the hull of the Krill ship and defeats them, right?
And this redwood is set up earlier in the episode as being a very hardy version of the redwood that can grow in absolutely any condition, in rock, in metal, in a spaceship. So this comes back.
I think they actually mentioned that it's crossbred with what are those space bears called? Those microscopic space bears?
Tardigrade.
Yes. See, there you go. So again, setup, payoff, all good, all fun. That's pretty much the episode. I loved it. I don't know what to say about it. I mean, again, there are some people, like even Mike from Red Letter Media, Half in the Bag, who are like, well, it's not really Star Trek. It's like, you're seeing a meal that you want to eat, but you can't touch it and blah, blah, blah. And I'm seeing this and I'm thinking, of course, it's not, if this was an episode of Star Trek, it wouldn't be the greatest episode of Star Trek ever made, but it is Star Trek, for lack of a better, term. It's giving me exactly what I want. It's giving me a clever plot. It's giving me some science fiction. It's giving me characters that I really enjoy. Most of the humor worked for me. I was laughing out loud at a lot of parts. Some of it maybe was pushing the envelope a little bit too much, but overall, I really liked this episode. Ian, what did you think?
I liked this episode. I'm not going to go so far as to say that I loved it. For essentially a pilot episode, I think they did a really good job. They did a great job of introducing the characters and their personalities. However, some of the struggles with the show, when I said earlier that it seems to have, it seems not to know what it wants to be sometimes. Tonally, the show was messy in parts, and I found that a little weird. Not enough for me to say that I disliked it, but getting back to the point where this scientist was pushed into this, what they call an anti-banana ray, and she ages 100 years in the span of 10 seconds. And horrible. That scene came moments after a little slapstick back and forth between Ed and Kelly, where they're like, oh, anti-banana ray, does it work on other fruit or just bananas? How about salads? And it's this... Right. It was a little bit forced comedic dialogue, and then seconds later, we're watching somebody die horribly. And yes, you're going to have to balance the comedy with the realities of it wants to be a drama at points too, and it's something that it can do. It proves in later episodes that they have the chops to do this. But I think that wide tonal shift was just a little bit too much, and I found it jarring. And that's something that happens occasionally in the show in general. But again, it's finding its legs at this point. You can't get too hard on it for a very first episode. I think it was very well done. There's some other issues as well where, and this is in Star Trek as well, where you'll watch an episode and you'll see the bad guys do something obviously silly, like how come you didn't take care of that? These things that kind of have to happen for the show to happen. But when the Krill landed, they landed their shuttles right next to the Orville shuttle. Why didn't they blow that shuttle up? Like, they got some guns. Yeah. Fire a couple of shots into it, because you know that you're both trying to leave with this device. So why don't you kill their escape vehicle so that even if they have it, they can't get away with it? Again, that stops the show if that happens right there. But a little bit more attention to detail when it comes to the writing, I think, would have been a little icing on the cake there. But again, first episode, I'm not going to be too hard on it, and it was more. It was more a study of the characters. I think that's the more important part.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Yeah,
G.I. Jolie.
totally get what you're saying about the study of characters, because initially, so what they do in the show is that they interplay the conflict between Ed and Kelly and their divorce with the drama that's happening. They play the Krill against each other. Like Kelly plays the Krill against Ed. Ed plays literally everything against Kelly. Because they're trying to get used to this dynamic of being divorced, but also being the captain and the captain's first officer, which is awkward and weird. And Malloy is his best friend. He's also captain of the ship. So he has a personal relationship with Kelly that he's trying to mask his disappointment about. So there's like this, there's subtext, there's nods, there's context, there's a lot of stuff happening, and they're trying to also give us sort of like a monster of the week type episode of Star Trek, where there's, you always run into somebody who's trying to steal a device, you're trying to stop them from doing it, and it kind of gets a little bit convoluted. And initially Ed comes off as super immature. Like, it was really hard for me because I'm used to captains of starships being like these stoic sort of hero types who are wise and who always know what they're doing, who aren't insecure about their faults. And it was, maybe I didn't like it because it was like almost was on the nose or hit home a little. I don't know. But he wasn't like a starship captain that I was ready to see. Kelly was almost like a starship captain that I was used to. So initially I didn't like it, but I didn't hate it. There was enough in that first episode to get me to watch more. And again, I'll reiterate something I said before. I started to like the characters together. Like, there's a scene in the, like, a loading bay, maybe, where Ed meets the crew of the ship. And he goes through them one by one, and he meets the doctor. And I've always loved the doctor on the ship, and this doctor is so cool. She just like they're always like a mother figure. It's weirdly. Right. But I was like, oh, I like her. And the not android
robot.
Yeah, he's an android.
Yeah, he's
whatever,
like yeah. I was very curious about Isaac. He just was like full robot aesthetic. And they really leaned into that. And Data was one of my favorite parts of TNG. So I was really, really interested in seeing how he would work with the rest of the crew. Like, immediately when they introduced them all together, I was like, no, this is a good crew. They all fit together. They're all funny. They all have weird quirks. I was suspicious of some, but waiting to see how they worked all together. I too love to have a soda nearby, so it was a good question. It was a very
drinking soda on the deck, yeah.
But yeah, so it was the crew, the visual of the crew as a group, a unified group, that really hooked me and kept me watching. But I will say I didn't really love the first episode.
Yeah, I guess I could say, yeah, the plot was a little bit disposable, but I liked the way it was resolved. Yeah, but it was the style and the characters that kept me wanting to come back for more, and like it definitely got better. So here's the thing: is before we wrap up this episode, we're gonna briefly talk about Captain Ed Mercer as played by Seth MacFarlane. I've heard some people criticizing him, thinking, "Oh, they should have got someone better to play the lead role." To me, he's the writer, and he knows exactly how to deliver these lines. I don't know if he's perfect. I don't necessarily love him, but it's like Jolie said, I'm not used to seeing a captain who's so immature and sort of petty. I think he's kind of perfect for the role. I don't know. Ian, what do you think of Seth MacFarlane as the captain?
I think he works. I don't have any glaring reasons why I think that they should have picked somebody else. He has an understanding of what he wants the character to be because it's him. And that makes him the natural person to act in that role.
Right.
He's not great at it. He's not terrible at it. He's not, I guess the bottom line is he's not taking me out of the story. He's not jarring in any way. Like, it works. Mm-hmm. And at times he's able to show quite a bit of depth, right? Like there's one scene at the very end after he's been a child for the entire episode, basically sniping at his ex-wife. When she comes in, she's like, yeah, I'm going to leave. He's like, you know what? You were always better at me than solving my problems. And he just kind of opens up there. And I'm like, all right, you're showing some humility. And then he sort of swallows his pride and he asks his ex-wife to stay on as his XO. Right. And that's the moment where I thought, okay, this has actually got something. This has actually got that little bit of humanity that has been like, that's what's missing from shows like Discovery, is that little bit of humanity, that getting to know a person, right? Mm-hmm. Their motivations and their fears and what makes them vulnerable, and facing our own personal struggles, as well as facing, the struggles of the monster of the week.
Right. G.I. Jolie.
Wow. I'm used to Starship captains being, having their own personalities, but always displaying the same sort of traits, being stoic and strong in the heat of battle, and not, a weird, maybe he was an alcoholic.
Mm.
Or no, sorry, like he's me piloting, not piloting, he's me captaining a starship. It's like,
right.
As far as I know, up until now, you'd have to go through something as crazy as Starfleet to get into that position. And it's like, Starfleet is like Harvard times a million, except for everyone's there to be an astrophysicist.
Right.
And it's like, how did this guy get through Starfleet?
Right. Like, he's
Does that
not...
mean there's hope for me?
Yeah.
It makes him relatable.
Right.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah, he's not like a tough guy like Kirk. He's not like a stoic intellectual like Picard, right? He's just this jabroni, and he happens to be piloting this ship, right? Like,
yeah, he's
great.
Like the guy that you run into at the bar like every other week. Maybe he's like eating a pile of wings, but mostly he's like watching golf in the afternoon on the TV. Like, that's this guy.
Mm. And his little Kermit the Frog, stuffed toy. That's so great. Actually, you know what? One thing, and I forgot to mention this, one thing about the show I absolutely would change is the plethora of references to 21st century pop culture. I think that takes me out of it. Considering this is supposed to be, I think, 400 to 500 years in the future, I think that's one ding against it that I wish they would not have. What do you guys think?
Were there many examples of that in the first episode? I don't recall.
Maybe, I just know that in the first 3 that we've watched, I've seen Kermit the Frog. I've seen references to, was it Keeping Up with the Kardashians or whatever that's called?
No.
Or what show was that? Well, anyway, we'll get to that episode later. But there was definitely a lot of references. Not a lot, but enough that it kind of was like, oh, so all the pop culture they know about in the year 2500 is 2021, pop culture, right? It's not like they were referencing, the Beach Boys and, I don't know, Al Jolson, right? Like, they were specifically referencing things that the audiences of 2018 to 21 know about. So that kind of took me out of it.
It's kind of Seth MacFarlane's MO, though, right? Like Family Guy is very, 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 very heavy on the pop culture and in current pop culture, which is essentially why I stopped watching that show, because I didn't find that too funny anymore.
Right.
And it doesn't, like, it's not nearly as heavy on that in the Orville, but it's there, and I don't know. Maybe he just can't avoid it.
Right.
There's only
One
so
thing.
many tricks in his bag.
Right. One thing I want to say, one of the jokes I want to mention is I actually really like that part when the Krill captain appears on the monitor, and he's standing off to the side, and he's like, "Ed's like, can you just move over?" And he's like, "What? Yeah, just move." There you go. It's just, sorry, you were like off center. I just love that because it's one of those conventions of sci-fi where, for some reason, in science fiction, they've had, Skype for 100 years, and we've only gotten the technology like 5 years ago. But Doctor Who, Star Trek, Star Wars, Transformers, they all have it, and it's just funny that it's true that they never had any of the problems. Like, no one ever on an episode of Buck Rogers talks to someone with their camera looking like this, where you can only see the top of their forehead, right? So I just thought that was a funny joke. But anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like there's like an entertainment tech, there's like a technical director on board of the Orville that takes care of all the screens and all the cameras to make sure everybody's perfectly centered for calls.
Right. Anyway, so basically, that's gonna wrap up our summary of episode 1. So we all agree that we enjoyed it, but it definitely left room for improvement. I think that's the general consensus, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, but definitely enough that if you watched the first episode and you didn't like it, I encourage you to keep going because it does get better. We all agree on that.
Absolutely.
All right. Okay, so that wraps up the first ever episode of MORE-VILLE, Orville, summarizing episode 1, Old Wounds. We want to thank everyone for joining us. You can find all of our episodes on Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, maybe not Spotify after this week, but we'll see. Maybe.
Well, yeah, who knows?
Who knows, yeah. Anyway, we support Neil Young. Okay, so thank you for joining us, Champ-Ian.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Jolie.
First ever podcast. There you go. Thank you, G.I.Jolie, as usual. And yes, until next week. Wait, what's her call sign again? I can't remember.
There's more where that came from.
Yeah, so until next week, there's more where that came from. Woo! All right.